If you've seen the unboxing of this kit itself, you know that some of the panel lines need a lot of refining and pretty much rescribing, and there also needs to be a bit of cleanup from some of the flashing left behind from the molding process. So firstly, I'm just going to remove all of that excess resin, and then move on to rescribing some of those panel lines. A couple of the panel lines are really not deep and need a lot of adjusting, so I'm firstly going to go in with a roughing tool, and in this case that is a saw blade from Scale Motorsport. Once that is done, I can move on to the finer one, and that is the engraving blade from Tamiya itself, to make them a lot deeper and a bit smoother all around. On one of the side skirts there was a bubble left from the molding process, and I also shot out of the panel line when scribing, so I needed to fix that as well. I quickly just filled it in with some putty. I'm using some from Zero Paints, but that is not available anymore, and otherwise I would suggest to use the one from Tamiya, which is just as good, but just a bit of a smaller bottle. Once the putty had dried, I could move on to sanding it smooth with some sanding sticks, and then later on refining those rougher scratches and sanding the entire body with some 600. With the entire body now all nicely scuffed up and refined, I could move on to the primer process. I removed some of the dust that was on the body, cleaned it up a bit, then moved it onto the Tamiya spray stand in order to apply a couple coats of primer. I'm going to be using the primer from Tamiya out of a spray can, as that is better for the resin, as the other primer that I normally use from Zero Paints is specifically meant for plastic and doesn't really stick all that well to resin. So instead of being stubborn and trying it for a fifth time, I'm just going to move on and use the right stuff this time. The first coat of primer is on, so I let it sit and cure for about 10 minutes in between, and then moved on to the second coat of primer. Now, one tip I would like to mention is to heat up the spray can a bit. This ups the pressure in the spray can and makes the mist come out finer and not be as rough as it usually is with the spray cans. So just heat it up a little bit. Be careful not to heat it up too much, of course, and then try spraying it and see that it has a bit of a better result. Also, in the meantime, there was a bit of dust that landed on the roof, so before coating that, of course, I quickly just removed it. After applying the second coat of primer, it was fully covered and I let it sit and dry for 24 hours. Now the primer is dry a lot quicker than this, but I'm not really used to using this primer, so I didn't really want to take any risks and just set it overnight to cure. After that was all said and done, I could move on to sanding it smooth, removing some of the dust that is in it and even some of the orange peel with some 3000 grit, and could then move on to applying the color. But before that, of course, I needed to again remove all of the dust that landed on the body, so I wiped it off with a cloth and also just blew over it with some air through the airbrush to remove all that remaining loose dust. All of the dust is now removed. I picked the color and I could start on those hard to reach, easy to forget spots before coating the rest of the body with a couple light coats. As you can see, the color is not covering all that well, so I'm giving it about 10 minutes in between coats to properly let it cure, and then move on to applying multiple other coats in order to get that perfect coverage. With the second coat on, the coverage is getting a lot better, but it's still not there. So another 10 minutes of cure time and another coat is applied. And I just kept doing this a couple more times until I was totally satisfied with the coverage and was absolutely sure that everything was covered nice and even and there weren't any spots that needed more paint. With the final coat of color on, the body fully covered, I let it cure for about an hour as I applied a lot of coats and I didn't want to risk painting over the clear too quickly with the paint still drying. So I moved it on to clear coating stage, of course. I blew it over with some air once more, then started over on those hard to reach, easy to forget spots, and then gave the rest of the body a light coat as well. The first coat is now applied, so I let it sit for about 5 minutes and applied the second coat. There is still a lot of orange peel in the clear, which isn't too bad as I'm going to fix that mostly in this coat, and then in the final 2 coats it will totally be gone. Or at least, I hope it will, of course. So the first 2 coats of clear are now on. I let it sit for another 5 minutes and I added a bit more thinner to the clear coat mixture. The clear coat was mixed totally according to spec on the packaging. That's totally fine for the first coats, but just to make it a lot smoother and flow out a lot better, I'm adding a bit more thinner just to make the mixture, of course, a bit thinner and help it flow over the body to remove that orange peel and make it as smooth as it could possibly be out of the gun. After applying that third coat, I again let it sit for another 5 minutes, and I wasn't really happy with the way that it looked yet, so I decided to give it a fourth and final coat to smoothen it out as best as I possibly could. The fourth coat is now applied, so I let it sit aside for 2 to 3 days before touching it again and moving on to the next stages in between.